Yo, what up, everybody? It's your boy Carson Fox with another edition of Fox on West Virginia Mountaineers Sports. And today's episode, we're going to recap the 2024 spring practice season and talk about the spring game of 2024. Before I get into that, I want to say thank you to all of those who have tuned in to my series that was dropped earlier this week about the WVU football game day experience and answering the question, is the price of the game day experience worth it, and breaking down those different topics. So if you want to access that series, go on to playlists and you can see part 1 through part 6 intro summary with 4 episodes really in between where I break it down and talk about everything from tickets to parking and tailgating and merchandising and concessions and the in-game fan engagement atmosphere. So anybody who tuned into that series, now tuning into this, I appreciate you staying around. Hope you have you as a subscriber as part of the channel, and we can flip ahead. We can be done talking about roster management for now, at least through the winter into spring season, and we got some football that's on the field actually to talk about. So West Virginia opening up spring practice about 4 weeks ago-ish, relatively, capping it off with one of the latest spring games of anyone in college football. If you've been watching spring games on ESPN over the course of the last couple of weekends, like, man, you're really itching and chomping at the bit to get out to Milan Puskar Stadium. It's going to be a beautiful day down in Morgantown. I just don't know how many people are going to actually show up to watch a glorified practice, which is what it is. But I'll hold on for there. If you watch my video about that talked about bringing Marshall in as an actual opponent to play a meaningless spring game, that's what I'd much rather see, and I think the benefits would outweigh the costs, but that's the argument I make in another video. So let's talk about spring practice. And what I'll say to kick off this video 2 minutes in, I really think this year, in comparison to almost every year going back to 2018, this is the hardest read to get on how well things are going with this team. Because, taking a look back across the years, we got to go all the way back to 19, fairly bare cupboard, especially after Marcus Sims and Kenny Robinson were dismissed, going with Austin Kendall at quarterback, trying to create a culture under a new head coach from a G5 program, and just a new way of going about doing things with new coaches, new time schedule, so on and so forth. Then in 2020, we were in the midst of the pandemic, and then the Vic Kenning situation happened over the course of the summer, so that was tumultuous. In 2021, West Virginia was really masking higher outside expectations after going 6-4 in a bowl-winning season of 2020 of the 2020 season. But still at that point in time, feeling the effects of the roster transition and the bare cupboard of 2019, misses in recruiting during Neil Brown's first and second recruiting cycles, losses to the transfer portal, Jared Deggy apparently being called the most improved player of anyone on West Virginia's team, and we know how he digressed in 2021. In 2022, more portal losses, Akeem Mesidor really being the number one going into that off season. I know there were more, but he was really the one that was the focal point, I feel like. JT Daniels coming in kind of at the later end of spring practice amidst a quarterback battle between Garrett Green and Nico Marchiol, only to go with JT Daniels ultimately for the season opener. And then 2023, West Virginia hit the reset button, as Neil Brown's been saying this, as a program. Only a few really of note transfer portal losses that West Virginia really made up for last year. Justin Johnson, was it Justin Johnson? No, I'm sorry. The defensive line, Jordan Jefferson, Charles Woods, Caden Prather being the 3 really noteworthy transfers out of the program last year. But Mike Lockhart stepped up, a cast of young wide receivers stepped up in the absence of Caden Prather, and West Virginia got Beanie Bishop to replace Charles Woods at the corner position. So 2023 was more normal, so now we're in unexpected territory here of 2024 of how good really is this team. To go back to my point about hitting the reset button, very good podcast that was done by Barrett Salih of the Smothered and Covered podcast earlier this week on Tuesday that I had the chance to listen to on April 23rd. Hitting the reset button, what I analyzed that meaning was that Neil Brown was taking a strengths-based approach to this program from there. In his role, putting the time and the attention into what he does well and delegating what he doesn't do well to others and empowering them there in their role. You hear about this a lot with organizations and companies coming from your middle managers down and how to empower employees using their strengths, and that's what Neil Brown wanted to go. So what were some of the tangible things that he did in 2023 that now downstream we're feeling the effects of going into 2024? One, letting Graham Harrell go. As he said in this podcast with Barrett Sully, he was hired as for his offensive prowess and abilities. That's what he had to show. He could coach offense. This offense went to 31.5 points per game on average in 2023, had a top-rate offensive line, the best rushing offense of any Power 5 team, produced a quarterback who averaged 300 yards per game combined between passing and rushing with a touchdown-to-turnover ratio of 29-4 in just 10.5 games. Because you remember, missed pretty much the whole Pitt game, missed the Texas Tech game, and he only played a half against Duquesne. So that's what Garrett Green gave you in 2023. Hiring Rasheed Marshall as the director of player relations, hiring Drew Fabianich as the general manager. So with more time on his hands, Neil Brown in 2023 and into this year is getting creative with how West Virginia takes a full calendar year approach to development, working on tackling without getting players hurt, tackling them in, I think it was track and field, like sand pits. I thought that was interesting and creative to hear about that. Speed training that translates to better defensive pursuit angles, creating better relationships with his players. He's taken the time. He has guys into the system now that he's recruited who are now in their later stages, 4th, 5th, 6th years now of development. So, and those guys that he recruited during years 1, 2, and 3 have now moved into leadership positions. So that's what you're seeing, the evolution of this program. So I think some of the things that I've read, some of the things that have been happening, I don't want to put too much credence into, but I'll give you some of the things that I kind of reading between the lines, kind of putting the pieces together, where I think West Virginia's at. And it's in a very good place as a team. It's as good as where 2023 ended, thinking that West Virginia was going to springboard into 2024, given the retention and giving the recruiting that they have done in transfer and the high school level. So starting it off, I think the most important thing, because we don't get those full injury reports unless it's coming from the head coach themselves at the collegiate level, not like the NFL that you get true injury reports. So finding out that Trey Lathan is a full go for spring practice, amazing, given that scary injury that he had at TCU. Josiah Trotter finally fully healthy after missing all of last year, tearing his ACL in spring practice. Montre Miller went through spring practice, but then was a no-go, in summer camp and never participated in the whole season. A great thing for West Virginia, given Malachi Ruffin was able to step into the second cornerback spot alongside Beanie Bishop. That way you get Montre Miller back for a year that you weren't expecting him to, or he would have been sitting on the bench if he was fully healthy. So it's awesome to have him on this roster. Getting a medical hardship waiver also for his 6th college football season. Cole Taylor at tight end, limited, really hasn't practiced much. Same with C.J. Donaldson. I did see him in some of those spring practice social media videos, but I don't think he was taking full contact. Same with Bryce Biggs, Tomas Remack, Asani Redwood on the defensive line, Orion Fisher on the defensive line, and Jairo Favris at linebacker were all out for the spring after having off-season injury. I'd say Remack being the one that's caused the most flux during spring practice, and I'll get into that for a second. Redwood being the injury alongside another one that happened during spring practice that's going to create the biggest headaches that West Virginia now needs to get active at that position group in the transfer portal to get ready for fall camp. So A couple of the guys that we found out about right at the start of spring practice who had portaled or medically retired, one being Tyrick Austin Cave, who gave you nothing really for 2 seasons after transferring over from Miami, a former fringe 3-4-star recruit who it just kind of was a mystery. You never heard his name ever come up. I don't know what he did for 2 years with this program. Good riddance, go to New Mexico. We'll find somebody else to do. Psyche Lawton, sorry to hear about him having to medical retire. I was really high on him whenever he did transfer to West Virginia. I don't know if necessarily Neil Brown and staff were as interested in him out of high school. Ultimately, him choosing Cincinnati, who was coming off a really good appearance in the college football playoff. So historic for them, a guy who's from Charleston choosing, so in-state, not as highly recruited by West Virginia, ironically, comparatively to some of the other players who have in-state over the last 5 years. He goes to Cincinnati, red shirts, comes to West Virginia, and we never heard his name over 2 full seasons. So I thought he was a guy who could have been potentially, work his way from third to maybe second string at the defensive line position. But unfortunately medically retiring. So sorry for the loss of Psyche Lawton. And then Charlie Katarinzik, also medically retired. It sounded like late there in winter, and then portaled right at the beginning of the season. So no history on that. I kind of knew out of this group of guys who are going into their 3rd year that not all of them were going to make it to this year. I'm talking about Sully Weedman. I'm talking about Landon Livingston, Mo Hamilton, and Charlie Katarinzik, that recruiting class that Matt Moore, I think it was 2022, brought in that many offensive linemen. So cream rises to the crop. Unfortunately, because of the medicals, Charlie Katarinzik not keeping up. So he'll if he continues his college career doing it elsewhere. So because of Remax injury being out, Biggs, another guy who's kind of like a depth piece on the O-line. Katarinzik out, moving in Brandon Yates. So the thing that I feel like stood out the most for me from spring practice of what I read was the Frankenstein offensive line leading to the defensive line standing out. With a full linebacker room, the front 6 for West Virginia's defense, I think, was overpowering West Virginia's offensive line, which obviously has me concerned as a fan because, the offensive line was the strongest point of, this team last year and helped it to create the best rushing attack in the country. So you're already losing Zach Frazier to the draft. I'm just wondering, will this line, once Remax back healthy alongside Wyatt Milam on the left side, I know it's going to be a battle that comes down to the end at right tackle between Xavier Bosley and Nick Malone. So at center and right guard, are you good with Brandon Yates being your full-time center and Quay Hubbard being your full-time right guard? That's the biggest question. And that's what these coaches, I think, were trying to figure out. Or are there any guys who have been in the program? I'm thinking Weedman, I'm thinking Hamilton, I'm thinking Livingston, who could before Kyle Altuner gets there as a true freshman, who could try and push these guys. And I think the biggest thing for me is this offensive line going to get the same push up front that it did in 2023 and win those battles? Or was this just the case of the defensive line going up against Zach Frazier, as Neil Brown talked about in the podcast with Barrett Salih? They've been attacking these really talented offensive linemen over the course of the last year, so they were ready to unleash it on Yates and Hubbard and without Remack there and attack this offensive line. So that's what my concern is. And will we see more passing involved by this offensive line, or by this offense, because of the offensive line not being able to road grade its opponents to the same level that it did in 2023? And I think so. And when I looked into the numbers from 2023, I found some amazing stats I want to share with you. So in 2023, so again, this was 10.5 games of Garrett Green, and then 2.5 games out of Nico Marchiol. In 2023, West Virginia's quarterbacks only threw 277 pass attempts. That's 27 pass attempts per game. You might think to yourself, like that's not that bad. Yes, it is. In terms of volume. In 2020, Jarrett Deggy himself threw 97 more passes. In 2021, the year West Virginia underachieved, he threw 143 more passing attempts in 2021. That was the fewest passing attempts by West Virginia quarterbacks since 2007, and we know how that went with Pat White at the helm of in a completely different offense in which West Virginia was running the ball over 60% of the time. So it was very different. In 2023, even though West Virginia was so successfully running the ball, scoring points over 30 points per game, you really don't, until you break down the numbers, see it there that West Virginia did not pass the ball all that much in 2023. And still, Green was able to pass for over 220-some yards. So with his rushing included, he was right at about 300. So that's what's wild is, the better... like in 2023, did Neal Brown hold back Garrett Green through 5.5 games? Yes, by his own admission. Was Garrett Green, C.J. Donaldson, Jaheim White just a lethal triumvirate? And are they going to do that again in 2024? Yes, I definitely think so. Don't get me wrong. But is this offensive line going to be as good in 2024 as 2023? I think you're already seeing some examples. I know because Remac's out, it's like, really, are you going to say that? I'm afraid that might be because of a generational talent that Zach Frazier was at center. Wyatt Milam's going to be awesome. He's already, what Neal Brown's saying, a first-round draft pick. So I think it might not be like if they were a 98% in 2023, it might be in just a 96%. So that's where I'm saying I think that the pass game is going to need to necessarily step up. So I really like that I'm hearing to transition and talk about something else. I'm really happy to hear, in the first couple of days of practice, Jaden Bray, Hudson Clement looked like Randy Moss's out there. So awesome to hear that this wide receiver room is evolving and getting this cast of characters involved, working with the quarterbacks. I know Green wasn't there for a couple of days due to his grandfather's funeral. Nico Marchiol doing really, really well, making waves. And then some other things that I heard from the podcast with Barrett Sallee is that Garnet Hollis Jr. is already what Brown's saying is an NFL draft pick. Wow. So that's high praise right there. Having faith in Wyatt Milam, as I mentioned, as a first-round draft pick. Jaheim White picking up where he left off to end the 2023 season. Josiah Trotter, it sounds like, could very well start come week 1 at middle linebacker over Reed Carico, Carico. I still don't have the pronunciation right on that, so sorry about that one. So, those are all positive vibes. So, and this team is more set at each of its position levels than it has been over the course of the last 5 years. And this was one of the first words out of Neal Brown's mouth after his first week's worth of practices that he had a press conference. This team is more ahead in its development and preparedness than last year and way ahead than any year between 2019 and 2022. So from a strength and conditioning aspect, but also to an alignment and practice efficiency type of aspect, that's why, I don't know how much I don't like this, and I know that's a double negative, this storyline coming out about perhaps that Rodney Gallagher is practicing at nickel corner or something. I don't know if I necessarily like that, because when's the last time that West Virginia's had a true two-way player? I'm not talking about a guy that played offense and special teams or defense and special teams. I'm talking about a guy who played offense and defense. I can't name one. And oftentimes this turns into the player not feeling like and then pointing to after the fact narratively, of not being developed enough, not being developed correctly, hitting the transfer portal. This happened just a few years ago. I know it's not to a recruit that's the same caliber of Rodney Gallagher, but this just happened a few seasons ago with Neal Brown's third overall recruit of the 2020 class, which was his first high school recruiting class. You remember Reese Smith was number 1, Garrett Green was number 2, and then a wide receiver by the name of DeVell Washington from Michigan. Came in at 6'4", 210. I watched his high school rivals tape, and I said, he can't jump. He's slow in a high school game. I know Michigan's not the greatest high school talent of any state in the country. It's okay. And I'm just like, whoa, this guy, is going to come and play receiver. And what do you know? After just 1 year of being a redshirt, he's switching positions to linebacker, ultimately leaves for Northern Iowa. So a miss there in recruitment. So I just hope that this was kind of like a fun test, necessarily, not something serious, that Gallagher is signing up for to potentially play 2 ways. I'd rather him put everything into wide receiver and return man, because he was a 4-star recruit. I talked about this in the pre-practice, 5 players who I think that have the most to gain video. So you can go back and watch that. And I mentioned that about Rodney Gallagher. Working on his route running, working on how to create separation. Bilal Marshall, this is the kind of player that you really earn your paycheck from as a wide receivers coach, is he has to be out there and being a guy who I feel doubles his catch load next year, gets involved still in jet sweeps, gets involved in the return game, so he's on that progression toward, as junior and senior, being the kind of player that he was prophesied as being a 4-star recruit. And so to hear that they're playing with him at nickel corner, I don't want this to be a DeVell Washington situation. He is too important. He's a great kid. The NIL, what he can bring to the table, because of his social media following, roots in the southwestern Pennsylvania area for recruiting, Rodney Gallagher is the kind of player you want to be as best as he possibly can be to maximize on his potential and to figure out at wide receiver, because that's his natural fit. But I'll talk about where he could also potentially play in a little bit. But I want to see him play a receiver. I want him, because now that E.J. Horton has now transferred, he's a guy who's right on the fringe of probably being the 5th wide receiver in this offense, behind Preston Fox, Jaden Bray, Traylon Ray, and Hudson Clement. Not necessarily in that order, but he's right in the mix there. So don't waste your time at playing him at nickel corner. Get him into the receiver spot, because you also got Cole Taylor, who's led your team in receptions last year, who's going to catch balls, and C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White can also catch the ball. So is he all right now your 4th to 9th best receiving option? I want to see him get in there and get involved, as at least where he's pushing on Preston Fox. Even though Fox had an awesome 2023 year. So this is what I mean of the floor raising at the wide receiver position, and Gallagher has to keep up. Horton kind of was, kind of wasn't. So, talking about him as being one of West Virginia's now 2 transfers during this spring season. E.J. Horton transferring earlier this week. Sean Boyle, right before I started recording this video, I hear the news of. And what I got to say about Horton, and I also got to be a little bit critical of the people out there who were calling for Keandre Lambert Smith as a transfer portal target as a wide receiver. This wide receiving core is fine. You don't, or you're going to have these transfers out. I know you want to, as I just said, Carson, if you can make the argument, you got to raise the level of talent of floor. But what you're losing, are you willing to lose? So you bring in a Keandre Lambert Smith at wide receiver. Okay, so already E.J. Horton was out the door without him. Does that mean that a Hudson Clement, a Traylon Ray, a Rodney Gallagher are just twiddling their thumbs, sitting the bench for 12 games? Are they going to redshirt? Nobody wants to redshirt. Nobody wants to just sit the bench and develop, they don't feel pressure of, they're not playing. They want playing time. They want field action. They want targets. They want to get involved. They don't want to sit and develop. They can go do that at some other school and then come back to West Virginia if they so choose. Mike, we're seeing that doesn't necessarily work out. in totality. But that's the players' mindsets, is they don't want to sit the bench. They want to play, and they figure it out on the field. So why do you want to add a guy who was a drama queen at Penn State and really outside of the West Virginia game did not perform like a wide receiver 1 for Penn State last year? Why would you want to add him to that room? Why would you want to pay him, use up whatever NIL money that you have left to use for this season and putting it into this guy? Because he was going to command money that's the same as what Devin Carter was this past offseason. So what do you need him for? So you have enough pass catchers. This gives an opportunity with E.J. Horton gone for Jarrell Williams, one of the true freshman wide receivers. I'm looking kind of like Day Farmer, the 4-star, Brandon Raymond, who was a 3-4 star, getting the first cracks, I feel like, to break into this offense and contribute. But again, they're going to have limited opportunities because I said they have 4 or 5 guys already in front of them now who have to go out and produce. And you can't stack players to that kind of magnitude of depth in your program anymore. It just doesn't happen with the transfer portal. Neil Brown said it himself after the year, like Sean Ryan transferred at the same time Winston Wright did. He said, we're not going to keep the kind of numbers at wide receiver that we have anymore because of the transfer portal. So why do you need 7 or 9, 10 wide receivers? They're not going to contribute all. So you got your guys, you got your core, and you're not going to, okay, E.J. Horton, that's why you were brought in. You weren't brought in necessarily to be this all-around type of wide receiver. West Virginia sees that up and coming in guys like Traylon Ray, Hudson Clement, Rodney Gallagher, and to an extent like Jaden Bray. You're a 6th-year guy using your COVID year eligibility. You're a one-trick pony of streaking down the field and making big plays, which is awesome. Which is awesome. If you get double your amount of target share, double your amount of catches, and you show that for this West Virginia offense, that's fantastic. What more are you asking for? Do you really want to go down and play for Rice? Or do you want to go play for, Coastal Carolina? That's your options. Go back down to an, above tier G5 team or a low grade P4 team. So that's what I mean. So sayonara, E.J. Horton, Sean Boyle at quarterback. I could have told you this, and I did to some not on record, but to friends and family about. I never thought he'd see the field at West Virginia. I think this was West Virginia putting its emphasis in recruiting guys that it knows it can get, rather than going, and I talked about this at at length in some previous videos, that West Virginia needs to go and get high caliber contributing players that know that it can play here. And I don't think I saw that in Sean Boyle. I think that was a guy who, good size, good, probably an okay, I don't know him personally or whatever you see. But when you're just committed to Charlotte, who I think just came up as a FBS program just a few years ago in Conference USA, do you really think that, well, I guess for Boyle's case, it wasn't you're going to play your first year, your second year, your third year. So you're playing your 4th year after Garrett Green and Nico Markey all are, either, graduated or in the NFL. And then by that point in time, is Cleo Wilkins already outpaced you on the roster, or West Virginia brings in another transfer? So Sean Boyle was really to be as part of this developmental program, throw passes in practice, and maybe, just maybe, in 3 to 4 years that he would have panned out. So the only thing that this then means is if West Virginia gets down to needing a third quarterback past Nico Marchiol, and that's where I think West Virginia is just going to have to get creative at that point in time, because then your season's shot. Do you bring in Rodney Gallagher, who played quarterback in high school? Do you bring Traylon Ray in, who threw, a nice a pass to Cole Taylor on a flea flicker? Can you, Morgan Burns at quarterback in Kansas State in 2016 and just pretty much have a wildcat kind of quarterback? Remember that game? Kansas State was down to its fourth string quarterback who was the wide receiver converted, and they ended up beating West Virginia. Yeah, still a game that sticks in my craw to this day. But that's what I'm saying. If you can't keep this. 3 is what you can get nowadays. You have your starter, you have your guy who's waiting in the wings for a year or two. If they're especially a first year, second year guy, and then you have your incoming, high school recruit. That's the way of college football anymore. If you go 3 deep, or you go 4 deep, you are blessed, to put it lightly. Back to spring practice. Like what I'm hearing so far, I think this team's very much set across the board. I'm not going to talk about a depth chart necessarily or anything that'll be something that we talk about in the season, in the summer. I am concerned now because apparently the injury to Corey McIntyre, even though Neil Brown's saying it's being evaluated, is a season ender. If you follow some of the guys, the insiders on Twitter, apparently he went down with what appeared to look like a season-ending injury. So that hurts because, for Torma Morba, looking at his limited stats, played a limited role behind Mike Lockhart. Him and Russell, same difference. So if you're kind of splitting time between the two of those, Corey McIntyre was a guy who might contribute as a redshirt freshman, either in that rotational basis, or are they going to outpace some of those guys? I don't think Torma Morba is the reincarnation of Tivondre Sweat or Byron Murphy from Texas. So if you don't think, as a roster manager in Drew Fabianich, that between the two of those guys and then Nate Gabriel, who is a true freshman, has the big body and can come in there and I think will ultimately contribute to this program, don't get me wrong. But if you want to level up and you want to beat Kansas State, you want to beat Iowa State, you want to beat Penn State, all these programs that are power rushing attacks, you got to have a stout defensive line. And I like what I'm hearing out of what Sean Martin's producing, Ed Vesteranen, and then TJ Jackson. Sounds like he's making waves as kind of like a rotational third player behind them. No Asani Redwood this spring. So it's this defensive line seems a little bit thin to me. I like that it sounds like raised their game and raised their level of play of competing against this offensive line. But if that's my first move after the spring game's over, is going and finding some defensive tackle. Or, just somebody who can play in the middle of that offense, because you can't have enough of those bodies. To redshirt Nate Gabriel, go with Mulba, go with Hammond Russell, and add a third piece into there. A 1 year or 2 year guy, really, because Mulba's going to graduate and move on next year. Russell is a 4th year player. Is he going to stay for a 5th year? And then it's just him and McIntyre, who's coming off possibly a season long injury. So what player will he be like coming back? So that's what I mean. I think that I trust in Drew Fabianich to find that right fit. And now you didn't spend money on Keandre Lambert-Smith in the portal. I don't think that you need to spend it on a J.J. Jones and try and poach him from North Carolina. To spend on wide receiver, go get some beef on the defensive line. If it's not one of these first cut transfers that I'm reading some lists, and I can't believe that Demonic Williams from TCU, who eye gouged Tomas Remack and eye gouged Milam, chop blocked Tomas Remack, and almost tried a third time and found out on, I think it was an extra point or kick. He's on the market. I wouldn't want to bring him in, but he's going to so apparently so coveted that Texas and Oklahoma are trying, and LSU are trying to get after him. So that's the going rate, it seems like, for defensive tackles. So does West Virginia have that NIL money to go spend? I don't know. And does Neil Brown think with just 3 guys at that position for the whole season they can hold up? I don't think so. I think they'll be active there. So let's talk about the spring game now. I'm 35 minutes in. I know I've gave you a lot of fuel and fire there. My hopes for the spring game, obviously, number one being no injuries, but I don't even consider that as a number one because I think that's all time. You never want to see injuries. Number one, I'll give it to you real quick. I think Nico Marchiol, I want to see him perform so well that people question whether he should be the starter. Some ooh and ah plays that, like, push Garrett Green. Obviously, clearly, Garrett Green, after what he did in 2023, is your starter. But I want that competitive fire between the two of them to burn, and I want Nico to have some, confidence. I want him to feel, loved on this team and this program by this fan base. That West Virginia doesn't feel like it has a starter and a backup. That it has two quarterbacks. It has a 1A and a 1B. At any point in time, that if you lose Green because of injury, and he lost out on really 2 games this past season, you have Nico Marchiol, and you feel confident he can beat anyone. So that's what I wanted him to boost his confidence, develop a rapport with this wide receiving core. Didn't look so great in last year's spring game, so I want to put all of those questions about his abilities to bed. I want this to be a 7-on-7 battle between these wide receivers and these defensive backs. If West Virginia is potentially sticking with, sadly, its 3-3-5 stack defense, then I want to see what these defensive backs can do. Is Garnet Hollis Jr. a draft pick like Neil Brown says he is? Can Jaheim Joseph be a starting caliber player? I know what Aubrey Burks can do. I know what Anthony Wilson can do at corner. What can Montre Miller do? Because we didn't get to see him. One time we did in the spring game last year, he got burned by Cortez Braham on a touchdown. So I know it's just a spring game, but still, that's the last thought I have of Montre Miller in my mind. Or Aiden Garnes. TJ Crandall, it sounds like, has been dealing with some injuries, so we might not necessarily see him. At the second level, is Raleigh Collins going to come out there and be like, whoa, Raleigh Collins? That's what I mean. I want to see some of these kinds of plays. And then on the opposite side at wide receiver, a guy like Jarrell Williams, who I feel like is either pushing, it's, put up or shut up time for him, or find another area if he can't break the top 6 of these wide receiving unit now that Horton's gone. And can guys like Hudson Clement raise his game, where I'm saying confidently, week 1, he's your number 2 wide receiver. Jaden Bray, he's your confident number 1. Traylon Ray, your number 3. Preston Fox is your 4. Get back Cole Taylor. I want to see a few plays here and there, just one maybe from each of them. Collectively, I want it to be a battle between both the defensive backs and the wide receivers, that they're competing at a high level and that they're showing they have that ability. Because I have the confidence in them. Do you all, as the fans, have the confidence in this wide receiving core? I don't know. Love to hear your thoughts. Leave your comments here on YouTube. So again, with this defensive formations, I think that Neil Brown and Jordan Leslie are going to play this close to the vest. They're not going to show necessarily anything to us as the fans that they're potentially going to a 3-4 defensive set with 4 linebackers instead of 3. A Will, a Mike, and a Bandit on the outside, which I don't like, and having 5 guys in the secondary. I'd like to see 4 linebackers, a Jack, a Sam, a Will, and a Mike across. Ty French on one side, Tyron Bradley on the other side, Josiah Trotter, and Reed Carrico, and then Ben Cutter and Trey Lathan. But I don't think we're getting that, at least in the spring game. So I'm very confused what's going to unfold about this defense over the course of the summer, and then, of course, what we will see week 1 against Penn State. This will be a narrative that I continue into the summer. So I think that changes my projection for a newcomer like Ty French. If things don't change, he will be relegated to more of a backup role behind Tyron Bradley, who will be the starter. But it'll put an increased emphasis on a guy like Jaheim Joseph at safety. And if that's the case, I'm thinking Jaheim Joseph's a backup. I think it's Anthony Wilson at Spear, and I'm thinking at free, it's Aubrey Burks. But now apparently they're moving Aubrey Burks to Spear safety. Well, what's Anthony Wilson going to do? Is Jaheim Joseph a part of that 3 starters in the secondary at safety? I don't like that. I don't. I'm sorry, but I would rather see the 3-3-5 be used as more of like a third down, long passing down situation, and have a 3-4 be more of the attacking style defense that we saw in the in the bowl game. And using, again, like I said, this is what you put all these eggs in the basket of Ty French, I feel like. So if he's going to split time with Tyron Bradley at Bandit, I don't like it. I don't like it. It's time to evolve this defense. Love to know your thoughts on that. Do you disagree with me? And then also, who are going to be the special teams returners? Is it still Preston Fox at punt? Is it Jaheim White and Rodney Gallagher at kick? I don't know if we're going to take anything away from this spring game because I don't necessarily think they kick off, or they just do some type of drills and practice, so you don't necessarily get that real kickoff. But I'm wondering about those positions right now here in the spring game. So love to know your thoughts. Sadly, I have a wedding to go to tomorrow, so I'm going to miss the spring game. Going to catch it probably on the replay on YouTube. Excited to see these guys out onto the field, even though I think that it would be much more exciting of a spring game if they were going up against Marshall. Milan Puskar Stadium, I know, would be much closer filled to this than it's going to be tomorrow. But if you are there, if you are going to put the investment into going up, hope Huey Mack's awesome. Love Huey Mack from my days back in high school. His rendition of Country Roads is fantastic. I still listen to all the time. So enjoy that. Enjoy being a part of the crowd, cheering on this program. This is awesome. I hope you bring some friends and family involved as well. I hope it's a great atmosphere for all the kids, for our as a fan base. And then, you take a few things away from this glorified practice that gets you excited, wants you to, have a season ticket package, wants to get you to, inspires you to come back for this fall and be there many a times this fall. Because that's what I think. I think that West Virginia has the roster that it wants. That this is what it's been building up for years at this point in time. And if 9-4 was potentially a fluke, because of the way that the results panned out with the schedule and the opponents that West Virginia played, then we will know. Bills will come due in 2024. We'll know how good this program is and whether it can contend for a Big 12 title. Because at a lot of these positions, there are upperclassmen, guys who are in leadership roles. So this is the time to compete. And without Texas and Oklahoma in this conference, like I talked about many months ago, it is going to be a battle up Mount Everest for Big 12 supremacy between Oklahoma State and Utah, who are really right there at the summit, and Kansas State's right on their neck. Kansas is kind of trying to make their way in. Loud and proud Texas Tech. West Virginia's right in there with Arizona, who had a great season in 2023 coming in. Loud and proud Colorado with Deion Sanders as its head coach, and Iowa State's just lurking in the background, just like they always do, similarly to West Virginia. But it's time for this program to lead this conference. We talk about all the ancillary things all the time with how loud and proud this fan base is, tunes into games, shows up at the stadium, supports its guys, even in down years like the football or the basketball year this past year. So now we need to receive results on the field. I don't want to necessarily repeat what I said in that spring game, but it's that's why there's buy-in. That's where there's buy-in by guys like Aubrey Burks to stay rather than hit the transfer portal and go elsewhere. That's why there's buy-in by guys like Garrett Green, who won't even pick up the phone by any teams trying to poach him this offseason. That Neil Brown has created this culture. He's created this process. West Virginia is now investing in its players through NIL. It's not 2021 anymore. It's not 2022 anymore. West Virginia is investing as a fan base into its players through NIL. It has all of these mechanisms in place, strength and conditioning, nutrition, and coaches who are filling out their role, doing it well. And now West Virginia's got to go out there and produce, get outcomes. And then it's got to start recruiting higher level talent than it has and for by the aggregate over the last 5 seasons. So this is a watershed moment for this program with Neil Brown as the head coach of the program, and I'm super excited for it. And I think that's going to be put out on display tomorrow at Milan Puskar Stadium. So I'm going to go watch, Saturday. I'm going to release this on Friday. Right now, I'm going to go try and see if Zach Frazier gets drafted this night. I hope he does. And then I hope Beanie Bishop and Doug Nestor do on days 2 or 3. So thanks for tuning in for this video. Love to know your thoughts. What are your thoughts on the spring practice season going into the spring game? I will do a recap video next week of the spring game, which will kind of coincide with what I'm thinking ahead for roster management over the summer. And then we can kind of pause on football. There's a lot going on with the basketball team right now and transfer portal recruits. The baseball season is getting into the meat of its Big 12 conference schedule, so it has its eyes on hosting a regional in Randy Mazey's last year. So a lot going on for this weekend, and this time as a West Virginia fan, always it seems like. So thanks for tuning into this. Hail West Virginia. Let's go. I'd love to have you a subscriber for my channel. Talk to you next week.